let's step back a little bit from the currency side and look more at the big picture in terms of what's happening. And I want to bring up one of my favorite quotes from Margaret Thatcher. She said, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money.
Right.
Isn't that really what's happening worldwide, and that regardless what they do with the currencies, that something fundamental has to shift and change here?
Yeah, I think it's already happened. I think the world is broke. I think if you did a hypothetical consolidated financial statement of every financial institution in the world, it would have a negative net worth. Now, there are some pockets of real money. Some of the sovereign wealth funds, some of the endowments, they're kind of long only. They've got these long-term contingent obligations to their beneficiaries or their citizens, but particularly in the case of citizens, those are very hard to define. And if they're well managed, so they sort of look like pockets of capital, but they're few and far between. The banking system and the national balance sheets, again, on a mark-to-market basis, I think there's no capital left in the world. So I think Margaret Thatcher was not just correct, she was prophetic, and we've already reached that point. So then the question is, where do we go from here? Well, for a while, it's sort of, my favorite metaphor is the old, Roadrunner cartoon where the Roadrunner runs out over the cliff, he's in midair, or sorry, the coyote runs out over the cliff, he's in midair, and he doesn't realize it right away, and he looks down and crashes.
Are we over the cliff now?
I think we are over the cliff, but we're still running.
Believe we're still running.
In midair. Believe we're still running and haven't looked down yet. I think that's where we are.
When are we going to start looking down? Are we pretty close?
We're very close. I think this deficit debate, debt ceiling debate that we just went through in the United States was at least a glance in that direction. Because it says, well, we can't just keep spending, and we can't spend our way out of a situation of indebtedness. Now, a lot of people disagree with that. You've got Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman says our biggest mistake was we should have spent more, and I hear Larry Summers saying the same thing. I hear the president saying the same thing. So a lot of people think that these Keynesian remedies just haven't been tried hard enough, and we ought to double down. By the way, I think that's what the 2012 election in the United States will be all about. It's going to be these two competing philosophies. One is, if we just spend a little more and increase aggregate demand and government expenditure multiplier, what gets to self-sustaining growth. And the other side saying, are you crazy? We're over indebted. We need to clean up our balance sheet, cut spending, save more, invest more, cut taxes, improve productivity. This is the debate for 2012.
But, it's clear that there's no political will to get off this road that the U.S. government is on. I mean, they're talking about cutting from future spending. They're not actually really talking about cutting the deficit. Why should we believe that they're going to solve that problem in 2012? Because, I'm the view that the government is over-leveraged.
Right.
You just look at it on a cash flow statement. They've got so much in promises and commitments, I don't see how they could ever possibly fulfill them.
Right, well, I'm not sure we should believe them. This is why I say going back to the international monetary system and the role of gold in these four scenarios of multiple reserve currencies, SDRs, gold, and chaos, I'm betting on chaos. I don't want that. I don't favor that. I don't think it's necessary. I think there are policies you could pursue to pull back from the brink and avoid that, but I agree the political will is lacking. The political will is there in some people. It's certainly there in the Tea Party. It's there in some more thoughtful conservatives. Alan Simpson, Erskine Bowles are not exactly, Tea Party tub thumpers, so to speak, but they've come out in the same place.
But was the debt limit increase a victory or a defeat for the Tea Party? You can look at it both ways.
Well, it was certainly not a solution or an answer. It was a victory in the narrow political sense, which was it was more their way than the president's way, and it was better than the next best thing. So in pure political space, it was a victory. But if you're asking whether it was a solution, absolutely not. This is not even a drop in the bucket because, as you point out, James, spending cuts are not spending cuts. In every state of the world, we spend more. But if we spend a little bit less more than we would have otherwise, if that's the right turn of phrase, then people call that a cut. But they're not cuts at all. Spending's going up, deficits are going up, debt is going up, and there's no end in sight. I mean, the United States actually, we're sitting here in London last night. The U.S. exceeded a 100% debt to GDP ratio, I think, for the first time since World War II. In other words, there had been a lack of borrowing because the debt ceiling had not been raised. So the Treasury had a backlog of issuance. Once the debt ceiling was raised, I think the President signed it on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, the Treasury went out with a monster $280 billion auction yesterday, and that new debt pushed us over the 100% debt to GDP ratio. Now here's the problem. GDP is about 15 trillion, give or take. Our deficits are running about 1.5 trillion, give or take. So that's 10%. So we're adding 10% new debt every year at putting 1.5 trillion on top of a $15 trillion economy. So we're increasing the debt to GDP ratio 10% every year, but GDP is only growing about 2%. Now, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office projections, they would say, well, GDP is going to grow 4 or 5, and we're going to put the debt issuance on a downward path, so eventually that debt to GDP ratio will come back into alignment. But that's not happening. That's a classic...
The economy is slipping into a double dip, as they call it.
Correct. Well, yeah, well, you're right. I mean, technically, it may be a double dip recession, but that's not how I think of it. I think of it as
it's the same recession, isn't it?
Well, I call it a depression. This is the second Great Depression.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Started in 2007. It's going to run, depending on policy, until 2014, maybe longer.
So 1.5 trillion deficit is really unrealistic for this year, isn't it?
Yes, because growth will be lower, tax receipts will be smaller. Although there are other factors in play now. These, the 99ers, they're running out. That's 99 weeks of unemployment benefit. That's expiring later this year. Remember, unemployment started out as a 26-week program.
Yeah.
That's classic unemployment. Then they had to extend it to 52, and then they extended it to 99, which is almost 2 years.
So maybe they'll just extend it again.
Well, back to the Tea Party. I mean, you think that was a fight over the deficits, the debt ceiling. Watch what happens on extending these benefits. I'm sure the White House wants that. I'm sure they'll make the case for it, but I'm not sure that that's going to pass. And so if they don't extend it, you go, but when did the recession hit full force? When was unemployment going up the fastest? It was 2009. I mean, this depression started in 2007 because that's when the housing bubble popped and we started to get asset price deflation in some important sectors. But it was 2009 was the bottom of the first recession phase of the depression when unemployment spiked. So that cohort, those people who lost their jobs then, who haven't got jobs in the meantime, are now the 99ers. They're going to come off unemployment later this year. That's going to cut consumption, cut government expenditure. So there are forces driving the deficit higher. There are other forces driving GDP lower. So you're exactly right. This debt to GDP ratio is going to get a lot worse. We're going to get up to Greek levels.